Hi everyone! My name is Brooklyn Jang and I'm the Regional Director for the Mercer County, New Jersey region of the Back to Baroque project. Today we will be talking about music of the Baroque era. Baroque music refers to the period of Western classical music composed between 1600 and 1750. In this period, musical forms and techniques we still use today were developed, like the opera, concerto, sonata, and fugue. Some of the most famous composers of all time lived and composed during this era, including Bach, Handel, and Vivaldi. Now let's dive a little bit deeper into the characteristics and context of Baroque music. The Baroque period was a time of major change, and not just in music, but in art, science, architecture, and politics too. Europe was shifting from the religious focus of the Middle Ages to a more human-centered world. One major feature of the Baroque music is contrast. Composers love using opposites to make things more dramatic. For example, loud versus soft, fast versus slow, and soloist versus full orchestra. These contrasts help keep the music exciting and emotionally intense. Another defining characteristic was the use of basso continuo. This is a continuous bass line played by instruments like the harpsichord, cello, or bassoon, which supported the melody and added structure to the piece. It's kind of like the musical foundation or glue that held everything together. Baroque music is also known for being very ornate and decorative. Composers often added trills, runs, and other musical flourishes called ornamentation to make melodies more expressive. In fact, musicians were expected to improvise some of these details during performances, which made each concert a little bit different. Additionally, Baroque music often reflected power and religion. It was performed in royal courts to show off a king's wealth and in churches to inspire worship. Overall, Baroque music was expressive, emotional, structured, and full of contrast. It created the building blocks for everything that came after.
Now that we've discovered the musical style of the Baroque period, let's talk about one of its greatest composers, Johann Sebastian Bach. Bach was born in Germany in 1685 into a large family of musicians. In fact, the name Bach was almost a synonym for musician in some parts of Germany. Even though he wasn't super famous during his lifetime, today he's considered one of the greatest composers in all of Western classical music history. Bach was a master of structure and counterpoint. Counterpoint is when two or more melodies happen at the same time, but still sound good together. Bach could do this in really complex and beautiful ways. An example is his piece called Fugue, where a musical theme is introduced, then repeated, layered, and transformed together throughout the piece. His collection, The Well-Tempered Clavier, is full of fugues and is still used by piano students today all over the world. He spent most of his career working as a church music director. One of his biggest jobs was at the St. Thomas Church, where he composed a new cantata every single week for church services. Bach wrote about in just every Baroque form: concertos, sonatas, masses, and keyboard works. Some of his most famous works include the Brandenburg Concertos, the Mass in B minor, Toccata and Fugue in D minor, and the Concerto for two violins. Bach's music wasn't really appreciated until after his death in 1750, when composers like Mozart, Beethoven, and Mendelssohn rediscovered it and were completely inspired. Today, Bach's music is admired not just for its technical brilliance, but for how deeply expressive and spiritual it is. He helped define the Baroque period, and his legacy continues to shape classical music centuries later.
Hi, I'm Val, and I'm a member of the Back to Bach in Mercer County. And another star of the Baroque period was Antonio Vivaldi, an Italian composer and violinist born in Venice in 1678. He was an incredible musician and composer, writing over 500 concertos, including around 230 for solo violin. His music stood out for its dynamic rhythms, flowing melodies, and vivid instrumental effects, from bold trumpet fanfares to delicate pizzicato strings. Interestingly, Vivaldi was also an ordained Catholic priest and earned the nickname the Red Priest because of his bright red hair. However, he didn't spend much time performing priestly duties. Instead, he dedicated most of his life to music. One of the most important chapters in his career took place at a school and orphanage for girls in Venice. There, Vivaldi taught violin and composed music specifically for his students, many of whom became skilled musicians themselves. This gave him a unique opportunity to experiment with new ideas. His most famous work, The Four Seasons, is a set of 4 violin concertos that use music to tell the story of each season: spring, summer, fall, winter. This approach of using music to paint pictures or tell stories is called program music, and Vivaldi was one of the first composers to use it in such a vivid way. Vivaldi also wrote many operas and sacred choral works, with one of his most famous choral works being Gloria in D. Through his bold musical style, teaching creativity, Antonio Vivaldi helped shape the sound of the Baroque.
Now we will listen to Maxime and Valentina Chen play Bach's Double Concerto for 2 violins. It was one of his most famous works, so we hope you guys enjoy. so much for listening to Mercer County's Region of the Back to Bach Project's presentation on music in the Baroque era. We hope you enjoyed and have an amazing day.